This story is based on real events to protect the privacy of those involved. Names, locations, and certain elements of the narrative were changed or adapted to enhance dramaturgy. The emotional journey, struggles, and transformation portrayed are rooted in real human experiences. He felt lost for years until he rebuilt himself from the inside, a true story of silent strength. Ethan Miller was not someone people worried about. From the outside, his life appeared stable, controlled, and quietly functional. Yet beneath that surface lived a constant pressure. The feeling that time was moving forward without him, leaving unanswered questions and unfulfilled versions of himself behind. He grew up in a modest American town where ambition was admired, but deviation was quietly discouraged. People didn't say, "Don't dream too big." They simply showed it through routine, repetition, and subtle resignation. Ethan learned early how to adapt outwardly, even when inwardly he felt uncertain. As a child, he was observant, thoughtful, and curious. He asked questions others ignored and imagined futures that felt distant but possible. Over time, those questions faded, not because he found answers, but because no one seemed to have patience for them. In school, Ethan was labeled full of potential. It sounded like praise, but it slowly became a burden. Potential implied expectation, and expectation implied failure, if not fulfilled. Each year that passed without clarity made that word heavier. Graduation arrived without celebration inside him. While others spoke of plans and certainty, Ethan felt suspended between choices, afraid that any step might confirm his worst fear, that he didn't truly belong anywhere. Adulthood arrived quietly and without ceremony. Temporary jobs replaced long-term dreams. Weeks blurred together, measured by obligations rather than meaning. He told himself this was normal, that everyone felt lost at first. But the first never ended. Years passed, and with them came a growing sense of embarrassment. Ethan avoided conversations about the future and learned to nod politely while internally shrinking. What hurt him most was not comparison, but invisibility. Life continued to happen around him, yet he felt detached from it, like a background character in his own story. At night, his thoughts became louder, memories replayed, opportunities questioned, and self-criticism became relentless. He wondered how someone could work so hard at surviving, yet feel like they were failing at living. The breaking point didn't arrive as a collapse, but as a realization. One evening, Ethan understood he couldn't remember the last time he felt proud of himself, not for something he did, but for who he was. He tried to change everything at once. New routines, new goals, sudden motivation, fueled by exhaustion. But transformation built on desperation is unstable, and soon the effort collapsed under its own weight. Frustration turned inward. Ethan began withdrawing emotionally, Believing isolation was safer than disappointment, silence became familiar, even comforting. One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings at his parents' house, he found a forgotten notebook. Inside were sketches, ideas, and fragments of stories. Evidence of a version of himself he barely recognized. Holding that notebook felt like grief, not for what he lost, but for who he slowly abandoned without noticing. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to mourn his own unfinished self. That moment didn't heal him, but it interrupted the cycle. Instead of chasing sudden success, he chose something quieter. Honesty. Honest reflection. Honest discomfort. Honest self-assessment. He began confronting fears he had ignored for years. Fear of being judged. Fear of being late. Fear of discovering that effort wouldn't be enough. Progress was slow and often invisible. Some days felt stagnant, others overwhelming. But Ethan noticed something new. He was no longer running from himself. He stopped measuring life by milestones others celebrated. Instead, he noticed smaller shifts. Calmer mornings, clearer thoughts, moments where anxiety didn't dictate his actions. Financial stress remained. Doubt resurfaced often, but the belief that he was fundamentally broken began to loosen its grip. A modest opportunity appeared unremarkable to most, meaningful to him. Instead of expecting it to define him, Ethan simply engaged with it fully. Failure returned, as it always does, but it no longer felt personal. Each setback became information rather than condemnation. He learned to pause before reacting, to breathe before panicking, to observe discomfort instead of escaping it. These changes didn't make him extraordinary. They made him present. And presence, he discovered, was transformative. People noticed the shift, not through achievements, but through energy. He listened without urgency, spoke without defensiveness, carried himself with quiet steadiness. One evening, Ethan realized the voice in his mind had changed. It was no longer cruel. It questioned him, but with fairness, encouraged him cautiously. He learned that self-respect is built through consistency, not success. Through promises kept when no one is watching. The past still existed. Regret still surfaced, but it no longer dictated his direction. It became part of his understanding. Ethan stopped waiting for confidence to arrive. Before acting, he acted carefully, imperfectly, and let confidence grow afterward. His life didn't suddenly become impressive, and for the first time, that didn't matter. A felt aligned, not with society's timeline, but with his own internal rhythm. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, days where old habits whispered temptations to retreat. But Eva had learned something essential. Staying was harder than leaving, and therefore more powerful. He no longer chased transformation. He practiced it daily, through choices that felt small but cumulative. What once felt like wasted years became context, not evidence of failure, but of endurance. Ethan understood that rebuilding a life doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means returning to yourself with awareness. His story was no longer about catching up. It was about continuing. There was no perfect ending waiting ahead. Only growth, maintenance, and renewal. And that, he realized, was enough. Because real success is not dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. And sometimes, the bravest act is simply refusing to disappear from your own life. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe.